New Zealand is doubling its defence spending.
And it means that our Defence Force will be able to respond significantly better with more capability, and also not only with Australia but also with Pacific nations.
Given we recently celebrated Anzac Day, I thought it would be a great opportunity to do a video on our Kiwi brothers and sisters across the ditch. And it's great timing because a couple of weeks ago, the New Zealand government dropped a giant announcement that they are going to double their defence spending over the next few years. This will be a game changer for our region as our closest ally massively increases in rebuilding its defence capabilities. So what is this announcement, and what is it the New Zealand Defence Force is actually getting? And what will it mean for Australia? I'm Pikos, and today we're talking tactics. On the 7th of April 2025, the New Zealand government released the 2025 Defence Capability Plan. The Defence Capability Plan is the government's plan to rebuild the NZDF and prepare for an increasingly volatile world. While this plan has been designed with a 15-year horizon in mind, it deliberately focuses on critical investments in the next 4 years to ensure we can adapt as the world changes around us. The plan aims to modernise the NZDF and make it combat capable again. It will increase the proportion of New Zealand's gross domestic product, or GDP, spent on defence to 2% over the next 8 years, which includes increasing spending by $9 billion on some major acquisitions over the next 4 years. New Zealand defence spending. New Zealand has really underinvested in its defence forces for a long time. I've often mentioned on this channel that I think Australia underspends on our defence force, only spending about 2% of our GDP on defence when we should be spending more like 3%. Well, New Zealand takes this underspend to the next level. Over the last 30 years, it has only spent about 1% of its GDP on defence. Given New Zealand is already a fairly small economy, smaller than Queensland alone in fact, this low level of spending has meant that the NZDF has had to cut critical defence capabilities, like combat aircraft, which New Zealand has lacked since the early 2000s. The reasons for this low level of spending mainly boils down to New Zealand's geographical isolation down the bottom of the South Pacific, well away from potential adversaries. However, New Zealand has also had a strong anti-military streak in parts of its society, which the government will now need to win over as it implements this plan. Regardless of the reasoning behind the low levels of defence spending since the Cold War, the NZDF is now only really capable of undertaking light duties in our region, such as patrolling New Zealand's waters for illegal fishers or helping with peacekeeping in the South Pacific. The COVID-19 period knocked around the NZDF even more, with the New Zealand government having it help manage their pandemic response for an extended period instead of conducting training programs. This led to skill and readiness lost, as well as causing a recruitment and retention crisis. And this isn't just me sticking the boot into the Kiwis. Last month, the New Zealand Defence Minister herself described the NZDF as currently being in intensive care.
This plan does that. It gets our NZDF out of the intensive care unit and not just growing, but growing where we need it to go.
Because of this, Australian defence planners have long regarded New Zealand as a liability rather than an ally, capable of making a meaningful contribution to regional security. But this looks like it's finally set to change in a big way. Why is New Zealand doing this? Sorry, but no prizes for guessing why this is happening. Like Australia, New Zealand is realising that the world, including our region, is becoming a much more dangerous place. In particular, there's concerns around China, its huge military build-up, and its force projection into our region. In 2024, China launched an intercontinental missile in the South Pacific, and then earlier this year, that Chinese flotilla that sailed around Australia conducting live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. It's like someone from a few suburbs over coming into your neighbourhood and firing off a machine gun left, right and centre without telling anyone it's going to happen. Of course you're going to be worried. As the New Zealand Defence Minister recently said,
So distance certainly is no longer any protection for New Zealand. Not when we have an intercontinental ballistic missile launched in the South Pacific. Not when ships with enormous strike power come into our backyard. This reality requires us not only to work with others who share our values and interests to reduce the possibility of conflict, but also to prepare ourselves should the worst happen.
what does the plan mean for Australia? The Defence Capability Plan will have three main impacts on Australia. Firstly, and most importantly, we will end up with an ally who is better able to pull its weight on defence issues. Not only will New Zealand be able to defend itself and its waters, but it will also mean that in the event that Australia is ever threatened, we would be able to bank on New Zealand helping us out in a more meaningful way. Secondly, while the New Zealand government has announced that it intends to utilise local Kiwi companies wherever possible to procure new defence material, the reality is that New Zealand doesn't have very much in the way of heavy manufacturing capabilities, and it has a tiny defence industry. This, combined with the fact that the new plan emphasises increasing interoperability between the NZDF and ADF, means that there are likely to be more opportunities for Australian defence industry as part of this build-up. I'll go into more detail about some of these opportunities further along, but in the meantime, it's important to note that the Defence Capability Plan states that New Zealand will seek to procure the same assets and equipment as Australia where it makes sense to do so. This will help with interoperability. Finally, the NZDF will need ADF help as it begins acquiring a bunch of new vehicles and equipment, many of which will already be used by Australia. With Australia's greater military capacity, we can help the NZDF in areas like training, specialist skills and maintenance. Australia already does a lot of this stuff with New Zealand, but you can probably expect cooperation and integration to deepen as this plan progresses. The 2025 Defence Capability Plan. The 2025 Defence Capability Plan is a longer-term plan that sets out where the New Zealand government will be investing its defence resources and how it will go with rebuilding the NZDF. It lists almost 30 investment areas, so I won't go into depth on all of them, but I'll talk about some of the bigger ticket items and more interesting projects, particularly where Australian industry may become involved. Upgrading and then replacing the Anzac-class frigates. Between 2025 and 2028, 300 to 600 million will be spent upgrading the Navy's two Anzac-class frigates, allowing them to continue operating into the early 2030s. In the longer term, New Zealand will replace the Anzac-class frigates with a new type of frigate. The New Zealand Navy will also consider replacing their existing two offshore patrol vessels with the same type of frigate, doubling the number of major surface combatants they have to 4. A potential partnership between Australia and New Zealand would be for the NZDF to join our General Purpose Frigate program, where we will be acquiring 11 new mid-size frigates. The first few of these will be built overseas, but Australia is intending to begin domestic construction on these in the late 2020s or early 2030s, which would fit with the NZDF's timeline for replacing their frigates. Increasing the number of ships built from 11 to 15 would have the advantages of bringing down the unit cost per ship, which benefits both countries, as well as providing more support to the Australian naval shipbuilding industry. Australia could then help with sustainment and major major upgrades and maintenance of these ships. New maritime helicopters. A squadron of 8 aging Super Sea Sprite helicopters provide the NZDF Anzac class frigates with their main anti-ship strike capability. However, these helicopters are becoming more expensive and difficult to maintain, with 3 already in storage. One of the most urgent projects in the Defence Capability Plan is the replacement of the helicopters in mid-2027, with $2 billion allocated to this. While this project might seem routine, the Anzac helicopters are a major part of the ship's capabilities. New, more capable helicopters will significantly increase the ship's warfare capabilities, as well as its surveillance range. If the NZDF ends up going with the same option as Australia in relation to this project, this would mean acquiring the MH-60R Romeo, which the Royal Australian Navy currently operates and has the ability to sustain maritime strike capability. Over the next few years, the NZDF will spend between 100 and 300 million to improve its longer range maritime strike capabilities by either arming an existing platform such as the P-8A Poseidon or Anzac class frigates with new missiles, or exploring other options such as a land-based capability. Over the longer term, the NZDF will look at broadening that long-range maritime strike capability across different domains which weren't chosen the first time around. So eventually New Zealand should be able to strike maritime threats from the air, sea, and from land. Australia's very own Strike Master system, which we have covered in a previous video, would be ideal as a flexible but affordable land-based strike capability. The Strike Master consists of a pair of naval strike missiles with ranges of 250 kilometres mounted on an Australian-made Bushmaster, which are already operated by the NZDF, Pinzgauer, Unimog and NZLAV replacements. One of the most significant changes for the New Zealand Army is the continuing replacement of the Pinzgauer and Unimog utility vehicles, and eventually the replacement of the NZLAV with a similar light armoured combat vehicle. There are a number of Australian-built options which New Zealand could procure for these projects, including Hawkeyes and more Bushmasters from Thales Australia, as well as Boxer combat reconnaissance vehicles and HX trucks from Rheinmetall Defence Australia. If New Zealand goes with Australian-made options here, it's obviously going to help with interoperability between our forces and allow Australia to assist with sustainment, while also providing our defence industry with a shot in the arm from the new orders. Logistics. It's not as sexy as brand new combat jets, warships or tanks, but as the Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown, logistics and supply is just as important to staying in the fight as anything else. New Zealand are showing that they are taking these lessons seriously by spending between $300 and $600 million on gradually increasing stocks of munitions and spare parts over the next few years, and then continuing to improve logistics facilities and stockpiles in the future. With little in the way of its own defence industry and long exposed maritime supply lanes, New Zealand needs to start stockpiling munitions, spare parts, fuel, and other critical consumables. So in my opinion, I think it's a great thing to see them taking a step in the right direction. Other areas of investment. The plan covers a wide range of other areas of investment, too many for me to talk about here, including the acquisition of air and naval drones, Javelin anti-tank missile upgrades, replacing the Boeing 757 fleet, enhancing cybersecurity capabilities, and many more. Let me know in the comments section if you want me to make another video on other elements of the plan later on down the track. Given the size of this project and its impact on Australia, we'll continue to follow the rollout of this plan as it gets put into action. What do you think? This spending program should be a game changer for New Zealand's Defence Force if its government sticks to it. It'll also bring Australia and New Zealand closer, as the plan notes. This means the two countries will combine military forces in defence of shared interests, common values and territory. This will include the introduction of more common, complementary and increasingly interoperable capability, further entrenching our ability to act together in support of shared interests. As we remember every Anzac Day, Australia and New Zealand forces have fought together as brothers in arms from the beaches of Gallipoli to the muddy trenches of the Western Front, and from the mountains of Greece to the jungles of Vietnam. It'll be nice to know that, once again, Australia and New Zealand would have one another's backs if needed. But what do you think about New Zealand beefing up its defence force? It's a step, or 5, in the right direction, but is it too little too late? Should they be buying jets? Many analysts are saying conflict in the Asia-Pacific region will become increasingly likely in the late 2020s. But this plan has some of the equipment being delivered in the 2030s. Should New Zealand also be focusing on solving its recruitment and retention crisis so it has enough personnel to actually use the equipment and vehicles they are buying? And one last question. For a long time, the size of the NZDF has been 1 light infantry brigade, a couple of warships and no combat aircraft. This plan doesn't fundamentally change this size, but is now the time to start expanding the size of the NZDF as well as upgrading its equipment. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you like this video? Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. That's it for today. My name is Pikos and we've been talking tactics.